Welcome to another edition of Inside PressBox presented by Maryland Mutual Mortgage. I'm your host, Stan the Fan Charles, and as you're watching this, I'm in sunny Sarasota, but we still have managed to put together a great show for you before I left. We'll talk with Evan Washburn, who's been a major part in making CSNBaltimore.com a real player in local lacrosse coverage. Our PressBox intrepid reporter, Dave Lashley, will take us inside what it's like to be a rugby player by giving us a look through the mud at Bosec Field. Our first guest is an old friend of mine, Tim Wendel, who's written a book called High Heat, The Secret History of the Fastball and the Improbable Search for the Fastest Pitcher of All Time. We talked to him about his book while on the baseball diamond at Johns Hopkins University, where he teaches writing. And as promised, I'm here with Tim Wendel, author and former sports writer for USA Today and Baseball Weekly. Timmy, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Stan. Great to be back with you.
It's been a long time. We've known each other a long time. Timmy, I'm holding a book up here called High Heat. And what's the subtitle? The Secret History of the Fastball, the Search for the Fastest Pitcher of All Time. Now, this book came out exactly a year ago, didn't it?
Just about a year ago, Stan.
Why are we having you on now?
God knows. Maybe because it's coming now in paperback with Randy Johnson on the cover. Don't get in a staring contest with this guy.
No, I don't want to do that. Tell us a little bit about how did you come up with the idea of doing a book on the fastest pitchers of all time?
Well, actually, Stan, this is years ago. I was in Cuba, and a bunch of us were debating who is the fastest pitcher of all time during one of the games down there. And here you suddenly had this debate going on in Spanish and English and all over. And all of a sudden it occurred to me going, hey, this would be a pretty good talking point for a jumping off point for a book. And that's what it became, me journeying around the country trying to figure out who is the fastest ever.
How long did this book take you to produce? In other words, how much travel did you do? How many people did you talk to? And how did you assemble kind of the tally that led to your selection?
Well, it took pretty much a year plus of traveling, Stan, and I talked to guys like Bob Feller, Nolan Ryan, Tim Lincecum, a lot of the contemporary guys, a lot of the throwbacks, Norm Sherry, who caught Sandy Koufax, etc. And what I learned was the way we kind of came up with the fastest pitcher of all time, at the end of each interview, I'd ask somebody, give me your top guys. Give me your top 6 or 12. And I learned after a while just to be quiet, because sometimes they go, oh, you can't compare Walter Johnson with Sandy Koufax, etc. But invariably, a couple minutes later, they would go, oh, yeah, okay, Ryan, Delkowski, Feller, etc.
Now, that's a name that we're going to see in the March issue of PressBox is Steve Delkowski, a little-known guy, but folklore. He's huge on the folklore scale, isn't he?
Very much so. I think especially in this town, as we look out over, Johns Hopkins Field and such, this is the city where, if things had worked out, Steve Delkowski would have played. He would have been like the preeminent closer of the early 60s. Earl Weaver had straightened him out. They felt he was the fastest guy going, but unfortunately it didn't pan out for him, and it went downhill, and he never did make the major leagues.
What's interesting about Delkowski, who's still alive, I believe, and living out in California, I've talked to Boog Powell about him and a couple other ex-Orioles, but you mentioned in the book that had the Tommy John surgery been available then in 60 or 62, that he might have had his career saved by that.
I think he would have had his career saved, Stan. I think it's hands down that would have happened. Now, whether things could have straightened out on other fronts. One of the great guys to talk with about Steve Delkowski, believe it or not, is Pat Gillick, who was his roommate for several years in Elmira in the minor leagues. Unfortunately, Steve had kind of a taste for the wildlife and loved going out late at night and things like that. And so even if his arm would have been fixed, we're not quite sure if he would have made it.
How did you, or how do people that talk about this, so much of it seems like it's subjective. Is there some objective truth to who the fastest was?
Well, certainly some of the guys like Walter Johnson, Amos Ruschi, even Don Drysdale, Sandy Koufax, we didn't have the technology we have now. But you talk with some of the old-timers, they feel the new technology, say the radar and the scoreboard, this type of thing, in a sense, muddies the waters. If anything, the old scouts like to say, it's the eyeball test. Let's really check it out and see how fast this guy's throwing by how I can look at him. And actually Nolan Ryan, who now is obviously a purveyor of baseball talent with the Texas Rangers, he loves to go down either line and watch the fireballers and see who reminds him of who he used to be like.
The book is High Heat, The Secret History of the Fastball and the Search for the Fastest Pitcher of All Time. It's a Da Capo, right? Publishing?
That's correct,
book. I wanted to ask you something about Nolan Ryan. What was so unique about him is that he kept his fastball longer and at a higher velocity than anybody else I recall.
And I think it's his mechanics, Stan, and ironically, Nolan Ryan almost quit the game because his mechanics were so poor initially. When I went down, I spent 3 days with him down in Texas in the course of doing High Heat, and that's one of the things that just bowled me over, was the fact he almost walked away from the game. And I asked him one time, why? I mean, here's a guy, almost a unanimous Hall of Famer, and he said, I felt I'd been given this gift of being a fireballer, and I wasn't doing right by it. And it wasn't until he went to California and got his mechanics together that he became the pitcher he is.
All right. Tim Wendel, again, the book is High Heat, The Secret History of the Fastball and the Search for Baseball's all-time fastest pitcher. Thank you for coming on here. You'll be able to view a little bit more of Tim Wendel on PressBoxOnline.com. Terrific guy, Tim Wendel. And just a reminder, as you're watching this program, I'm in Sarasota, and you can catch my latest blog on the O's at StanTheFan.com. When we get back, Evan Washburn of CSNBaltimore.com stops by to talk some lacrosse. If you've heard all the hype about the Orioles spring training facility in Sarasota, but you can't take a trip down to see it for yourself now at CSNBaltimore.com, where you'll find a video of the newly renovated Ed Smith Stadium.